Welcome to Haines. Your agenda is very future-oriented and full of what-ifs. What if mines go into production in the Yukon, in Haines? What if the Haines port becomes a gateway for getting products to and from the Yukon? What if a rail spur is developed to this particular tidewater port? Dealing with all those what-ifs takes some high-level thinking. Abstract, futuristic thinking is arduous, so I have decided to bring you some relief by sharing some indisputably concrete facts about Haines, about what is going on now in the Haines Valley. Thanks to the State of Alaska Department of Transportation and the Alaska Legislature, now we are redesigning the Haines Highway so that it is a safer corridor for commerce. Now we are redesigning the Wells Bridge so that it can accommodate heavier weight traffic, including ore trucks, and those behemoth campers people like to travel in. Now we are preparing to replace the bridge across the Kahini to the famed Porcupine Placer mine site, enabling future development in that area. Now we are enlarging our small boat harbor, replacing Port Chilkoot cruise ship dock, and addressing deficiencies at our deep water freight dock. And now we are correcting deficiencies at the airport. If someone were to visit from outer space, I believe they would conclude that what we humans mostly do is build roads, bridges, airports, and harbors. Why is that? Because efficient, reliable, safe transportation methods and corridors are the keys to commerce. And our communities are built upon other things, commerce. One time, many, many years ago, I was at a rooftop restaurant in Fairbanks during a municipal league meeting. The lights of Fairbanks seemed to stop dead at the edge of the vast interior, begging the question, why does this city exist in the middle of nowhere? It exists because the Yukon is a trade route. The same can be said for Haines. Haines is poised to be a transportation hub for commerce, coming and going to the Yukon and interior Alaska. Together with Skagway, Haines may be the next nexus where the highway and Lynn Canal come together, making it possible to move goods effectively between the lower 48 and the Yukon and Alaska. We are missing one not-so-tiny component, and this is for you, Representative Isaacson, electrical energy generation. Our hydro supply required supplementation with at least 55,000 gallons of diesel late this spring. And to power two and all that just to power two basically residential communities, because it was before the tourism season ramped up. In order to help Haines grow with year-round commerce, year-round employment, we need year-round, reliable, affordable energy. Thank you for coming to help us explore our options and the partnerships that will bring the preferred alternative, whatever that may be, to life. Thank you for coming. Haines.
Thank you. Well, by sheer unfortunate accident, I got stuck with being the MC. Our other board member, Dave Berry, was supposed to be, but he's ill at home, so I've gotten stuck with it. And a meeting manager, I'm not really, but we're going to work our way through this. We're here to do the same thing that we did in September, and that is bring people together to work on the idea of developing our port, actually helping develop our community. As part of that, a lot of us are looking toward the idea of rail up into the Yukon mining districts. From the latest reports I see, I'm still going back to where I started with it should link up with the Alaska Railroad because of the added benefits. The amount of mining that is currently going on in the Yukon and expected to go on in the next few years, I don't think would support an independent railway, at least for a while. So again, I'm going back to where I started with the idea it should link up with the Alaska Railroad. Tomorrow there'll be a rail study plan meeting here in Haines, and Bruce Carr will be here from the Alaska Railroad, so I'm sure we'll have an interesting discussion about that. He's the one who actually brought up the idea of what they call an island railway, which is having a totally independent rail from Haines up into the Yukon. But one bright star in that is sitting alongside me. And that's Matt Vickers from G7G, who's looking to build a rail from the oil sands in Alberta, Fort McMurray, through Canada, through the Yukon, and over to link up to the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. If that's there, it wouldn't take much in the way of a spur, but his wife and I are trying to work to turn that rail to Haines. So I've got an in. His wife's real nice. She loves Haines, doesn't she?
She does.
So that's where we are, and you folks are from the different ends of the government and industry, and it takes all of us working together to make any of this work. If anybody's going to get ahead, we got to do it all together. It's kind of like a boat. We either float or we sink, but we're all going to do it. So with that, I think maybe where we should start is with Matt, because he's the man with the rail end of things that could tell us about what he's doing. And then from there, I think we should go to Bill Walker, who's the former mayor of Valdez, who knows what a port does for and to a community. He's been there to see what happens from the beginning. So I think that might be a way for us to go, if you're willing to do that, Matt.
Thanks, Bill. First and foremost, crucially important for me to acknowledge the Indigenous people whose land I'm on. So I lift my hands to them, and in the language of my Tsimshian mother, I say Koiksum Nisum to them for allowing me. What I'm wearing is my traditional name, which is Ganats. So translated out means eagle speaking. So again, as I say, I lift my hands to them for allowing me here. I'm honored to be asked to come in and share a little bit about where we are, what we're doing, and how we're going to make this dream a reality. And obviously, most importantly, it's going to take the work of a lot of people pulling together. Bill used the analogy of the boat, and I'll go to the canoe. So again, traditionally for us out on these waters would have been a traditional canoe, and if we're not pulling together, we're not going to get to where we're going when we want to get there. So G7G stands for Generating for 7 Generations. Again, traditionally for our people, if we're going to make a major decision today, we have to think how that's going to affect the generation 7 down the road from us. So crucially important to have that type of vision with respect to what we're going to be doing, because as original stewards of the land, crucially important as to major decision how development will take place in our respective territories. So how I got involved in G7G is exactly that. My heritage, Tsimshian on my grandmother's side, from a little village called Kekatla, just out of Prince Rupert. As you're well aware, the Tsimshian come into Alaska too with the Metlakatla, Alaska. And then my great-grandfather, so my grandmother's father, Haida, from Haida Gwaii. And my grandfather saw this beautiful Tsimshian maiden and left behind his heritage and his village with the Hiltzik Nation in Bella Bella and moved up north. So we're always referred to as the Northern Vickers, because the vicar's name actually comes from Naglisla or Bella Bella. So because I carry hereditary names, traditional names, responsibility comes with the honor of earning those names, and one of them is to ensure that the lifestyle for us that we've enjoyed, passed down from generation to generation, is passed on to those yet to come, again, 7 generations. So if we were saying no to the pipeline, gateway coming to the West Coast, then provide an alternative, because we know the world needs, wants, and will get that energy somehow, some way. So why not be part of it rather than opposing it? So how I got involved, as I say, these 2 gentlemen came and presented a PowerPoint presentation to me. I looked at it and went, wow. So it was based on, as some of you are well aware, or maybe most of you, 2005, 2007 studies that were done by the state of Alaska and Yukon government. And I believe the concentration was strictly iron ore, or the mining industry. The guesstimate was about $11 billion to build the rail at that time, and the revenue generation was around the billion per year. So my partners looked at that study. They were doing some wind generation testing in the Teltan territory, and one of the issues the Teltans mentioned to them was these big iron ore trucks coming through the middle of their village every half hour. Isn't there a better way of doing this? And so they looked into other ways of possibly doing that, and one of them was this rail study. And then they looked at it rather than single commodity, what about all commodity? And most importantly, what about the oil sands from Alberta? So that's how I got involved. One of the key things G7G does is before we look at talking publicly about any project, the First Nations or tribes in Alaska are going to be a true partner with that project. So with our rail project, the First Nations and tribes will be receiving 50% of the profits generated from that rail project. So based on that, I started in Anchorage, met with the Chugach, the traditional council, as well as the corporation, the Alaska Chugach Corporation, and talked about our project. And I was told they would welcome anything we could bring because of the decline of the resources on the North Slope. So that was a great sign. They then introduced us to the Alaska Intertribal Council, representing all the villages in Alaska. And sorry, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he brought us to all the villages from Delta Junction to the border in Yukon. So we went and met with the villages and got letters and resolutions of support from them on the concept. And then the Yukon First Nations met with them and a letter of support from them as well. And then the Casca, 2 in the Yukon and 3 in BC. And then the Treaty 8 Tribal Association of BC. So in British Columbia, the majority of the 203 communities have not signed treaties. So Treaty 8 in Alberta comes into BC around the Fort Nelson, Fort St. John area. So I met with them and met with all their communities. Then Treaty 8 Alberta, the 25 plus communities, and got resolution of support from them. And then last July, went to the Assembly of First Nations for all 633 First Nation communities in Canada and got a resolution of support from them. And so based on that, then we started letting the news out there a little more because we didn't want to be blindsided. At the same time we were doing that, we were meeting with government. BC government, Alberta government, Yukon government, and approaching the state government. One of the first massive supporters in Alaska was a mayor by the name of Luke Hopkins out of Fairbanks. I always jokingly say he CC'd everybody but God in his letter of support, and maybe that's why we're not where we are yet. Kidding, kidding. But so from Alaska, then Yukon, the territorial government, Minister Curry Nixon gave a strong letter of support, and obviously stating how much they'd already spent on the earlier studies, roughly $6 million on those feasibility studies that were done. We approached the BC government, and prior to the election, they said, we don't have any money, but we'll follow your progress. And Alberta government, as I say, our first meeting was about 1.5 years ago, and I can joyfully say 2 weeks ago they went public with putting in the first $1.8 million towards the feasibility study. So
who did that?
Alberta government. To our understanding, before they did that, they talked to the Alaska government, they talked to Yukon government, and they talked to the federal government and BC government. And there's talks of Saskatchewan government, because when they heard what we were doing, they asked, can't you extend that a little bit from northern Alberta to Saskatchewan because of the potash and grain. I mean, we do have rail. We all know the nation-building rail that was done 100 years ago. We call our project the nation-changing rail because the first one's built, this one will change. And we strongly believe that not only the provinces and the federal government, but Canada and the United States, because we're all well aware that Alaska have been wanting and trying to get this done, the connection to the lower 48 for some time. We're a firm believer that if our projects don't benefit everyone, then they're not going to be successful. So we're doing our best to ensure that everyone sees the benefit in this. We got touted as pipeline haters, pipeline bashers. That's not the case at all. We certainly have nothing against pipelines. However, my elders have told me I have responsibility to the waters off our coast. And after speaking with the Chugach and them stating that obviously what the Exxon did to their traditional way of life and how they've adapted to, rather than their traditional gathering, now are experts in guiding the super tankers in. They're experts in cleanup. To our understanding, they were used down in the BP disaster down in the Gulf. So in talking with them, as I said, that's why I got so excited when they said they would welcome anything we could bring. Talking about spurs, there was a number of spurs that are indicated, and actually I can maybe make a copy of the last presentation. I was just up in Dawson City at their annual International Gold Show. They asked me to come up and make a presentation because it was mostly mining up there. So I was just up, and I can maybe leave you with a PDF copy with all the maps and so on. There are maps and that on our website, as Bill certainly knows, but I can update that for you if you like, and leave you with copies of that. But looking at, I call it the fat red line on the piece of paper, blank piece of paper right now, we get approached by a lot of First Nations saying, you haven't talked to us, that's going through our traditional territory. Right now, until the feasibility study is done, we can't be 100% sure that exactly where this route's going to go. We have a general idea, obviously, but we can't be exact with it until our engineering firm certainly verifies this is the route it's going to take. And let me back up a little bit. That was the change master for our project, making our idea a project. When AECOM, they're basically the #1 engineering firm in North America, came on board and did a scoping document of our idea and showing the viability, starting at 1 million barrels per day, no backhaul, that's just one-way haul, then we're profitable. And twin tracking, we're going to be able to do 4 to 5 million barrels per day. And that's twice as much as the current oil sands is producing. So twin tracking, obviously the way to go, because it'll be designed for that right from the get-go. And then it's all commodity. So you're not concentrating on one commodity. So I don't know how much time you had allotted for me, sir, but that's the best Reader's Digest version I can give to you as to where we're at as of today. And because of that 1.8 million starting next month now, as I say, I'll be going knocking on all the First Nations doors again along the route to get the membership on board, because I've just met with the leadership, so the elected chief and council so far. So I'll leave it at that for now, sir.
That's all what Haines talking about is up there. Let me just point it out. People may not be familiar.
Okay.
This is the map from the study, the 2005-2007 Alaska Railroad study. They proposed a northern tier route and a southern tier route. And then here's the Haines, a couple some alternatives for Haines being linked up. And the Haines linkage was the one that they ruled profitable, like just hands down profitable, just because of all the mineralization and development north of us. And they did that at a time, quite a few years ago now, when they didn't even know about the mineral activity that is now going on in the Yukon. There's a lot more going on than they based their estimates on as far as profitability. So one has to assume that the numbers would even look better. So this is what Matt is basically talking about when he mentions that study. And it's easy to visualize how Haines hooking into the shipping lanes, these sheltered shipping lanes, and having the breach, it's the major breach in the whole coastal mountains in this part of Earth. The gradient here is just perfect, as has been surveyed in the past, for a totally industrial strength heavy haul railroad. It's the one breach in these coastal mountains that allows for that.
Most people don't realize it's actually over 100 years that studies and surveys have been going on to run rail out of Haines. The Haines Chamber of Commerce was formed 100 years ago to support building one of the railroads that was envisioned then. The Alaska Midland is the one that went the furthest as far as on-the-ground surveying, and they came up with no place to exceed 1.5% grade.
That was this one here in 1907.
And
Haines at Fairbanks.
the thing with rail is when you exceed 2% grade is when you start losing the tonnage that you can haul, because you get to where you're trying to raise or lower it too quick to be able to handle it. So that's why this route out of here is the route that'll pay. A lot of other things that people can dream about and say, oh, well, I can do this or do that. When you get down to the facts of it, it's just standard operating procedure for railroads, over 2% you lose.
So Bill, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
All right, so being from the interior, of course, I have an interior centric, because that's been my universe.
Sure.
So a lot of this is new, and if I can get the information, that'd be good. But what makes, in G7G's mind, what is the attraction with Delta and hooking up with the Alaska Railroad there, going to Valdez, versus creating some spur, I'm not sure where that would link up, somewhere in the Yukon to Haines?
Yeah, so great question. So the one that we've gone to the First Nations, is that red, the top line?
That's the northern route.
Yeah, so that's the one that we presented to the First Nations as the route.
Hook up Alaska Railroad.
Yes,
That's the idea of it.
yeah, at Delta Junction.
Yeah.
And the key why we chose that, most importantly, was looking at offloading into the Alyeska or taps at Delta Junction to get down to Valdez. The other thing that we realized very quickly was that truly it would be just about a single commodity rail export, because we're not getting the tidal. So what about backhaul? So then we looked at going down to Glen Allen and punching through from Glen Allen to Port Mackenzie, because we understand that there's all kinds of work happening there. So now we got backhaul, right? Bill had been approaching us and talking about Haines. And as we can all appreciate, the budget's fairly limited. I'm glad for the question, because I left that part. Right now, the four entrepreneurs that started this, we've got $8 million of our own money into it. And he talked about the beautiful wife with me. She said, you'll let me know when our house is at risk, won't you, dear? I said, darling, that'll never happen. But, you know, you get concerned after a while. The pockets are only so deep, so you need to get other people involved. We're honored to have 3 funders that have stepped forward. Those familiar with the financial world, a draft term sheet, the terms of the money they'll provide to us have been provided already. And it's from 12 to $18 billion. So funding the entire project is already there. The toughest money to get is the feasibility money, or the soft cost funding, as we all know. So that's been the burr in the side. And so many people say, well, you already have the funding, right? What's the issue with government? Why haven't government? I said, well, government, what about industry? Why haven't they stepped forward? And I think most importantly, it's what we hear, it's those guys. That's a dream. They don't use the word pipe dream because of the analogy, I guess. But I think more and more people are realizing when you get guys like Warren Buffett investing in rail because of the Bakken play and transporting by rail, that maybe there's something to this. And maybe we should be doing something here. And so we've approached the Warren Buffetts and Jim Pattisons of the world, and they're not into startups. I think once the feasibility study's done and proves what we already know, we're going to get the attention of people like that coming in to want to buy.
So when you're looking at Haines versus Point
Yes.
McKenzie, what makes Haines attractive in this feasibility play? Since wherever you go, either Point McKenzie or Haines, you're going to have
Right.
resources that are able to be developed anywhere along those routes.
Indeed. So I think a couple of key factors. Obviously in Port McKenzie, the infrastructure that's in place there already, and then the planning of the circling of the trains, if I can use that easy analogy as to getting the train yard in and out. So infrastructure in place, crucially important, and hence why we looked at Valdez. Here, again, I've got to say, I've never met a pit bull like this gentleman sitting beside me. He sinks cement and he doesn't let go. And he doesn't get a reply from me, he'll send another one, he'll send another one. And that's great, because as we can all appreciate, when we have a project of this scope and mass, it's mind-boggling for me to remember who's who. So he kept at me and said, okay, if we can't bend it from Delta to here, what a spur? Make perfect sense. It would make perfect sense. He showed me the port. He showed me where the old tank farms used to be. So we've gone and walked through all of this. Obviously, I'm not the engineering firm, but I'll be taking those pictures back to me, to AECOM. As I say, right now we have very limited 1.8 towards a $40 million requirement to get that feasibility study done. So the 1.8 would be a pre-feasibility again. So studying the studies, you know, it's so frustrating for me. As I say, especially when I've already got the commitment to fund the entire project, it's very frustrating. However, I digress. Hopefully that helps in answering directly as best I can.
Well,
Because I'm trying to understand the whole project.
Yeah.
Doug, what Matt, Bill, and I have talked about is when you look at this, you say, okay, it'll take so many tons of ore or whatever it is you're hauling to pay for so many miles of rail. Well, that's quick and easy and not very thoughtful, because you need to think about what is this rail going to do to the region. And what I'm getting at is the auxiliary jobs that come along. And if you look at the history of the United States, as rail moved is how our country grew. The rail belt from Anchorage to Fairbanks, you know, it's growing in the places that are sensible to grow. But Fairbanks is kind of up there. So if you have the rail coming this way, you would have all those miles to develop, and you'd have, okay, the goods going in at a slightly cheaper price than what's currently happening, but then you'd have people start up companies that might ship things out. So all of these things add to the value of that rail being there.
Well, and this is why, if I could ask these type of questions at the outset, rather than later on in it, just to make sure we're covering it, because rail in and of itself isn't going to be a job stimulator, as we know, because I've got the largest refinery in Alaska in my city, and when it shut down one tower, the railroad lost 100 jobs. When it shut down the second tower, the railroad lost another 100 jobs. And it went from providing the railroad with 55% of its income to now it's at about 20%. At the same time, Isabelli, the other big engine, the mine there, has been depressed as far as its exports. So what happened around the coffee pot here is essential too. And then you were saying, where is industry? We've got to make sure we can permit some of these mines and
That's right.
Get the resources underway so that you have the real basis for keeping
Well,
that.
that's why every official here will tell you, and I said it to you, I'm not interested in seeing governments come up with grants to do this. I'm interested in investment, yes,
Yeah.
but from the government, what I look for is help with permits and right-of-ways. You know, and that's exactly where I started with Dr. Harvey Brooks, that was Assistant Minister of Economic Development in the Yukon, and that's almost 3 years ago. I'm still at the same place, and he was so thrilled that somebody came to him with a business plan instead of a handout. So, and that's where I'm at with you, as I've told you before, and everybody at the table does the same thing. But the value is there. That is something that Haines worked on, our former manager, Robert Venables, worked on, is that Alaska-Canada Rail Link study. And if you look at the summary, and it's on our webpage, you'll see those additional things that go along with more than just hauling the ore. The whole rail link study, doing the whole 1,200 miles, they figured 25,000 jobs. So if you do this, which is a little over a third of it, which has got the most involved as far as mines, you got the city of Whitehorse, that I think there's a man here will agree is growing leaps and bounds, and probably is going to need some more infrastructure to help maintain it, you know. When you start adding those things together, you suddenly have a lot more value. Bill, can you tell us about, you were the mayor of a port town, watched it develop, and what it did with and to, the good, the bad, and the ugly?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And first of all, let me thank you for the invitation, the opportunity to meet folks that I've heard of before, I haven't had a chance to meet. Matt, your company, as I mentioned, has had contacted me in the past and talked. So it's a real pleasure to meet you in person. And wow, what a beautiful day. And Haines, maybe it's not to you, but I'll tell you, this is, I have a thing about windows in buildings. That's my thing. I just hate basement. I've been to a lot of meetings, a lot of boards I'm on, sort of joke about, you have to have windows because Bill doesn't like me. This doesn't get any better than this. I mean, this is the most spectacular spot I've spoken at. I think view-wise. And last night, I think I said I had the best salmon I've ever had. I grew up in Prince William Sound and commercial fishing. So you guys doing lots of good things here in Haines. It is really a treat today to be toured around a bit. Robert was available to do that, and Bill and others. So, you know, when I was asked to speak about docks and Valdez and port development, I wasn't quite sure where to start. We start with the Guggenheims, the shootout that we had back in the 1800s when we had two railroads competing to come out of Valdez, and they made it 15 miles and ended up with a big shootout. And they shot so many of each other that they couldn't continue the railroad. So we only had 13 miles of rail. We didn't get even to the bottom of Thompson Pass. So you know, when the earthquake came, I was actually on the dock 4 hours during that day before the quake started to get all of our freight off the dock because it was we had a construction company. So I know what a port does for a community because I grew up in the old town of Valdez and saw the commerce that went on there. We lost a lot of our freight after the earthquake because Anchorage sort of, in their own way, kind of took over the freight business, and we didn't get rebuilt in time. A lot of the freight ended up going through Anchorage. So I saw sort of the peak of it a little bit, and then I saw what happened when the freight's taken away, and then we brought it back. What we did on the current port development, and typically, and you'll hear from Bruce Carr, from the Alaska Railroad, typically on port developments, every successful one thing in common, you see a railroad. We're sort of unusual. We don't have one. We sort of almost had two, but we didn't have any now. But our uniqueness is because of the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline coming down sort of a railroad tracks. It's in a round piece of pipe and buried, and it pushes a lot of oil and commerce that direction. But what we did was, after the earthquake, we moved to the new town, had one dock, and decided we needed a larger dock. We needed a lay-down area and whatnot. So before that, I mean, back up a little bit, we went to the industry, and the discussion, a big discussion about the industry's role. We said, what can we do to help you when they selected to bring the oil pipeline to Valdez? How can we help? Exxon, Arco, and BP actually went to the governor, Governor Egan, and said, can you help us do tax-exempt financing for our infrastructure, marine infrastructure? At that time, there was a provision in the Internal Revenue Code that provided for tax-exempt financing if you did conduit financing through a government entity. And Governor Egan said that we can't do it as a state because it looked like we're too close to the industry. So we did go talk to Valdez, so they came and talked to Valdez, and so we did the tax-exempt financing. We had to go out and pass a $2 billion revenue bond issue to the voters. And that was a tough sell. We were a community of 700 people and $2 billion, a pretty big number back then, and still is. And but we did that, and it passed. And so we created the tax-exempt financing for the Alaska Terminal, and they drew down about $1.3 billion of that financing, of which a 1% fee was paid to the city as sort of their fee. That began a permanent fund of $13 million, and now it's about $150 million. So it was a win-win situation of working with industry. What can we provide to you? And now the tax laws have changed. You can't quite do it that way. You actually have to own it yourself and then lease back and various other things. But so the issue on the actual development of the building of the new port, it was a floating dock, 700-foot floating dock. One of the critical things for us was that we ended up with a contractor. We did not go with the lowest bidder. And I was mayor at the time, and when you don't go with the lowest bidder on a $50 million project, you get some grief. And boy, I'm glad we didn't go with the lowest bidder because we had some serious problems, and because of who we had Morrison Knudsen at the time, they were able to. They said, we're not going to do a change order. We didn't anticipate this. We didn't. We're just going to deal with it. And it was a very significant change we had. So, it's the port itself has worked well. I mean, Fairbanks is obviously our market. Interior of Alaska has been our market. A lot of the military shipments coming to Alaska come through Port Valdez. Obviously, during the pipeline, we lowered our tariff significantly to zero, as I recall. And about half the pipe came through Valdez, about half of it came through Seward. So it's it's not just the tariff that comes through; it's the families that come and live there. It's a destination point on the trucking. It does a lot for the economy rather than just the revenue to the owner of the port necessarily. So I was excited to hear about and look at what you have available here in the way of deep water port opportunities, because one thing you can deal with a lot of things, but if you don't have if you can't start with the port facilities as far as the deep water port, it becomes pretty challenging from there on up, and you certainly have that here. There's lots of different ways of financing ports these days on geo bonds, revenue bonds, tax anticipation notes, all sorts of ways of doing it. The key is we work with someone who's going to use the port. We've had a situation with our port that we had, at one point we had 100 cruise ships per summer, and they came and talked to us about a specific cruise ship dock, and we said, where's the commitment you're going to continue to be here? And 2 years later, they changed their traffic patterns, and they went from 100 to 0. And so that sometimes happens. And so if you have an anchor tenant for your port, you want to make sure it's an anchor tenant that's going to be there after the infrastructure has been completed. I'm very excited about what I'm hearing about the possibility of tying the rail, tying the rail into Alaska in some way, other sources of transportation into interior Alaska. I think that you're on the right track in that regard. And I'm a big believer in taking what you have and play the hand you're dealt, because you have some incredible facilities here in the way of transportation and port facilities. I already took you by today and tweeted on that as well, Bill. Take what you have rather than necessarily a greenfield project. A brownfield project is much more different. Sometimes the permitting process is the most challenging. That is where the governments can get involved and do that. Some have actually gone out and taken ownership of the project. The government has until the permitting is done, and then hand it over with the permitting. Sometimes with a governmental entity or a non-profit entity to get permitting is a lot different than the private sector. I was asked some years ago, about 10 years ago, by the mayor of the North Slope Borough, Eddie Nagyat, Fairbanks North Shore Borough, Jim Sampson, and the Valley Mayor Dave Cobb to put together a Port Authority. Under state statute, you can do a Port Authority where one or more communities can come together and create a Port Authority. The first one is in Southeast, of course, the IFA, the Inter-Atlantic Ferry Authority. And the second one is the one I just talked about, the Alaska Gas Line Port Authority. So, that's a structure that it has some benefits. It's tax exempt. We got an IRS ruling, and we're tax exempt. And the state statutes were actually created for Fire Island out of Anchorage for the port development there, which never happened. But the structure is still in state statute. So, you might want to also consider a Port Authority as a way of developing the port as well. The only disadvantage of that is it has to be governmental entities that are involved in the Port Authority. We've got a number of regional corporations such as True Gas has to be a member, and they can't, or we lose a tax exempt status. So, so there's a number of vehicles, legal vehicles out there and available, financial vehicles available for port development. They have a saying in Korea, they say once you start a project, you're half done, and I believe that. To me, that means once you start a project, you've got down to the studying goal, so that's a good thing. So maybe you are half done when you actually start something. So studies are important, but boy, sitting down and saying, well, how are we going to make this happen? The real key is to have a discussion like this, because you have different pieces, and somebody hears something they know from somebody else, and maybe this could work, and from the White Horse area, and so it's a great way to sort of sometimes people aren't talking to each other. It's hard to understand where they're coming from. So I'm very impressed with what you're doing, and I'm honored to be a small part of it, and absolutely delighted to be in Haines today. So I think that's my
Thank you, Bill.
My short
Because a lot of people that haven't been in a community with a port worry about, oh my gosh, what's this going to do to us? Then you got the other bunch that, oh boy, what it's going to do for us, and you've at least had the experience of watching what it does as it builds. And that's why we're so glad you were here today. With what we have here, I discovered that one of the biggest problems that's kept Haines from developing before, as far as the port, is it's just never been advertised. I was amazed at the number of people that had no idea that, number one, Haines existed. Number two, that it was on the water. And there are people that you would say, gee, they ought to know that. And so that's been one of the great awakenings to me since I've gotten involved in this process, is what people don't know that you just normally assume that they should. So that's why we're doing things the way we are, is trying to get people together that, from the diverse parts of the government and the industry, to do exactly what you were talking about. Talk and start to understand each other, so we can start bringing these things together. And I think from at least the words I get from the different people I talk to, it's working. And hopefully today, being kind of a higher level, you being, past Mayor Valdez, we have people from White Horse and Haines Junction. We've got Doug here from the Alaska Legislature, or Matt from the Railroad Enterprise end of things. And these folks from industry and the Yukon government. It's just taken what we've been working on and raised it up a little bit, but hopefully we'll get some more answers, and undoubtedly a dozen more questions for every answer we come up with. So that's the whole idea. Mike, can you give a little idea of what you're able to do with ADA, with helping with
Sure.
the funding and so forth and things?
Sure. Let me first start off with a little background of what ADA is. ADA is a subdivision of the state of Alaska. It's a public corporation. It is under the umbrella of the Department of Commerce. But we're different to normal state agencies in the fact that we're a public corporation. We're actually governed by a board of directors. So there's a certain amount of autonomy underneath the department, although it's still part of established in '67, really to alleviate unemployment and to diversify Alaska's economy and to promote economic development. So over the years, we've developed a toolbox of financial mechanisms and vehicles that allow us to finance different types of projects in different ways. We have debt instruments, we have equity instruments, we're able to issue bonds. And that makes us a little bit different, is that most development finance authorities around the country issue bonds or do loans we're probably one of the few that can actually invest in a project. Traditionally, we've invested, we've had to own the entire project, Skagway Ore Terminal, Ketchikan Shipyards, the Red Dot Road and port facilities, and FedEx Terminal, and others. We've had to actually own 100%. So we actually work with the customer, like the Red Dot Mine. They needed a 52-mile road and or concentrate storage facility plus a port. They were able to build a mine. We came in and built them a road and port facilities, and we own that 100%. And we get our money back by Tech paying user fees and tolls on the road and port facilities. Recently, our statutes changed, and in terms of our equity program, we're actually now allowed to invest partially in the project. And the first project we did was the Buccaneer jackup rig that's now drilling in Port Inlet, where we were approached by Buccaneer Energy, and we came up with a financial structure, an ownership structure, where we were partners with them, and we put in $23 million, and that we capped our investment at $23 million. They came in with $5 million, I think, worth of equity, and then they raised another $96 million in debt. So we actually became a partial owner. It was the first time we were actually able to partner with someone, help industry, share the risk with them, but not take on all the risk and all the liability ourselves. And that's really changed the way that we can operate now, which has really changed the way the board looks at things, and of course they're the ones who have the final say on everything that we do. We can come in, first let me say, we are required by statute to get repaid. We don't do grants, and we don't do venture capital. We realize there's some risk involved in every project that we invest in, otherwise it's not a project. But we are required to get repaid. So when we get involved on the equity side, a fairly comprehensive due diligence process and feasibility, pre-feasibility studies that we need to do to make sure that all the pieces are in place so that when the project is finally completed, we're actually going to get our money back, and the project is actually going to do what it's going to do. So we're looking at business plan, we're looking at revenue sources, we're looking at customers, contracts, sales, all the rest of it to make sure the package comes together in one piece and that we're able to get our money back. We have the ability for patient capital, so we don't have to be paid off in 4 years or 5 years or 10 years like a bank. We actually have the ability to stretch out the repayments over 50 years, such as the Red Dot infrastructure up there. The jackup rig, we're going to be paid back in 5 years. Mustang Road, we're going to do 15. So there's all these different ways that we can actually work with the customer depending on their needs in terms of how quickly and how easily they can repay us. So that's really where we come in, is when the project's ready, when it's sort of got the pieces together, we can come in and actually help put the deal together.
As I understand, you used to live in Skagway, so you've got a real idea of what our port is here.
Oh, yeah.
So that in itself is a big help, which we appreciate.
Mike, this legislative session, there's a lot of discussion. I don't know if it came to fruition about ADA being able to greatly expand the scope of funding. I guess as a result of the possible Alaskan gas line, that ADA could put a much bigger chunk of money into a project than they were able to do before. Did that actually pass?
No, I think there's two separate things. That was specifically related to the LNG project for Fairbanks, getting LNG out of the North Slope to Fairbanks, and that was there. There's already a program in ADA called the Sustainable Energy Transmission Supply and Development Fund, SETS, and that allows us to invest in energy infrastructure. The legislature allowed us and appropriated some funds to actually allow ADA to actually put more money into that specific project. It wasn't a general, you can put more money, but we can actually raise significant amounts of money, I mean in the hundreds of millions of dollars if needed. But we do need to see it, we do need to know it's going to get repaid. So in terms of how much we can raise, sky's the ceiling to a certain extent, but it really depends on our debt capacity and our ability to sell the project.
Mike, so does it have to be an Alaska state entity to apply to
It
aid?
has to be in the state of Alaska.
Okay.
Right, well, I almost see the thinking is going on, a project like his, from the Yukon border to Delta Junction would be in the state. Although he's a Canadian company, would you be able to get involved in that portion of it?
Yeah, who the company is, where they're located, is of little interest to us. The project has to be.
But, so the amount of the project that's in Alaska, you'd be able to get involved in? Possibly.
Well, yeah, but this is going to be an interesting one because it's really one project. It happens to cross a couple of boundaries. So can we invest in the whole project? I don't know. That's for the...
So that's what I'm
for the
saying.
higher ups to
I was
decide.
looking at just the portion.
But we can definitely do anything that's in the state. Whether we could actually work on the piece between the two borders, I don't know. We'd have to look at our Attorney General and see where we can get involved. But the other parts, yeah, definitely. And it doesn't matter whether we're Canadian or whoever.
Yeah.
That's
Thanks. Well, Haines, I know that, part of what you do is the public-private partnerships, that you're kind of the Yukon version of Mike of a sort. Maybe you could describe what you're able to do on your end, that we can start getting some ideas flowing here.
Well, from my end, I guess, I can speak for myself, what I can provide is the technical expertise gained through Alaska. Really, like there's a lot of stuff that was on the website that was taken down, which I still have. I still have access to the whole spreadsheet and everything else used to make the calculations on the mine tonnage and the revenue generation and all that stuff. I still have access to that. From the public-private partnership side of it, what I can help with is, I guess, provide technical expertise in the pre-feasibility studies. And then from there, we can perhaps approach Canada P3 Corporation to get some money to go into the feasibility study for the Canadian portion of those kind of projects. And that's about what I can commit myself to.
Well, that's, we're trying to be a group of friends here and, look at, how do we fit these pieces of the puzzle together?
Definitely any expertise, any historical figures, mine development, mines that are going to be coming online and everything, that would be, I think that's been contacted.
Great.
And Bill, I just want to add, sort of fill the gap between Bill and Haines here in terms of financing. I'm going to talk about P3s tomorrow night with the borough. That's a critical piece of financing that's used extensively these days. It's not really, it's new to the US, relatively new. It's been used extensively in Canada, Britain, Australia, and other places. America's catching up on using the P3 model. It's a fairly complex model, but it's where public sector uses the private sector to build public sector infrastructure and shifts the risk of the development, operations, and maintenance to the private sector for public use. It's not an asset sale. It's not, the public sector retains ownership, and at the end of the agreement, the facility goes back to the public entity, or you extend the agreement. So they're used for wastewater, for toll roads, energy, so bridges, hospitals, parking. Parking is a big one. You have public infrastructure. You lease it out to the private sector. They develop it, operate it, maintain it for 25, 30 years. They make sure that it's available for its public purpose, and they make their money back on the fees that are used, which allows public infrastructure to be built without public funds up front, and allows for a lot of budget certainty.
There for a little bit, it sounded like you two were on the same page.
It's hard, but when it comes to public-private partnerships, we can spend easily 2-3 days discussing many different types.
Yeah.
Because we have DBO and DBFOM and DBM, and it's like.
And I'll talk about that. I'll talk about that tomorrow.
And so and they are complex projects. When you think about here's the simple way that I explain public-private partnerships to people. Normally, under traditional public government procurement, government sits down and says, well, we need an X building or whatever to facilitate this, so that we design it, we build it, etc. Under public-private partnerships, it's kind of backwards thinking. Except you tell the company or whatever it is, or you put it out there for bids, I need a hospital of 300 beds. That's it. The private company decides how to build it, what materials to use, and everything to introduce efficiencies and innovation. And they either finance it, they operate it, maintain it, like I'll say, you know, at the end, the contract is extended, it gets delivered to back to public hands, but in the meantime, it is a public institution. It's not privatization like a lot of people say.
Good. I think this is the kind of information that the people in the industry around here need to learn so that we can go ahead with the type of things we want to do.
And actually, in adding to that, if you don't mind, that's one of the three funders, is the P3 out of Edmonton, that is ready to fund the entire project. So,
Yeah, we have partnership with CP3, and we have P3 Canada,
yeah.
and there's a lot of them.
Andy, you've been kind of quiet down there. You know, you get stuck with having to help figure out how we put all these things together. But you can tell people a little bit about what your end of this would be.
Well, I'm the regional planning chief for Southeast Alaska, or Alaska DOT, Department of Transportation Public Facilities. With respect to Haines, we have a project to reconstruct the Haines Highway from the airport, essentially the airport, to milepost 25.3, which was the end of the last rehabilitation project we had from the Board of Gov. Bill's comment kind of comes to mind, the comment where once you start a project, you're half done. Well, we hope to be half done on the Haines Highway project this summer when the environmental document is approved. The community can expect a public meeting in Haines and Kwetla sometime this summer, hopefully early this summer, early June. Following that, we've got 3 segments that are in the design process. We currently have got a segment from the second mudslide area across the Wells Crossing to 25.3 to replace the Chilkat River Bridge. We have also begun design on the segment from the airport out to mile post 12.3. A little bit later this year, we'll start on another segment in the middle. At least one project will go to construction in 2014, about this summer next year. And whether that's the bridge project or the project from the airport to the 12-mile will depend on resolution of native lands, a native allotment in the bridge section. We were making progress until one of the heirs died, and now it's going through the probate. We'll be going to probate process, and that takes a bit of time with the BIA. We're hoping that we might get both segments in 14. At this point, the time it takes to clear right away will tell. So that was an unexpected event, where you can't predict when somebody's going to, an heir is going to die, and a land allotment a year after. But it seems like if any delays can happen, they will happen. So the developing 2 segments, and if we're lucky, we'll get them both to construction in 2014. But we're pretty confident on the segment from the airport to that's 12 point, I think it's 12.5. And we will get the bridge segment shortly thereafter. We hope if that's the way the approvals fall in line. And as Stephanie mentioned, Mayor Scott mentioned, we're also planning on replacing the Kahini Bridge in 14, and that's on schedule. I should note that the Chilkat River Bridge, which is a sizable structure, is going to be replaced to meet Overhaul in the future. As far as the pavement design for the highway goes, that will be designed to meet legal highway loads in the interim until a demand for mine haul comes into being. We're doing our best to monitor mineral development on both sides of the border as to what might use the road in the future, and also the development of port infrastructure that would create such a demand. And we feel that if we monitor things, we'll have sufficient time to put down the additional layers of asphalt that would be required to accommodate mine haul that demand does come into being. One of the reasons for that is the Federal Highway Administration does not pay for any work that's over and above legal highway haul. So, and generally what we have done in the past is same as what we did in the Klondike. It would be to, when it comes to developing the highway to extra legal load requirements, we would consider using state funds with some agreement with the folks that are using extra legal loads to pay some sort of a toll to repay the state for the extra expense. We started this on the Klondike Highway a number of years ago, and it seemed to work out well.
You got a question, Mike?
In the planning of this roadway, is it considered a corridor, so pipeline, railroad, and other transmission lines can be included in the environmental study, or is that, how does the state look at this, your planning effort? Is it just roads, or can you incorporate all these other?
When it comes to the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, the document is developed around the scope of work at hand, in this case the highway. And we're reconstructing the highway to bring it up to current standards, to meet standards that the current traffic demand dictates. And we're flattening curves to meet the design standards, and widening the roadway and providing shoulders as safety considerations. But the scope of the document and the effort does not accommodate any or consider any other structure, just the highway structure.
Andy, Doug has a question for you.
Thanks, Andy. In considering a railroad coming down, I imagine that there would be some right-of-way limitations. How great is the right-of-way corridor right now for the highway? Could it accommodate a multimodal
It would be difficult. I think our highway right-of-way varies, and I think the minimum right-of-way is about 100 feet and to 150 feet.
So from all we've been able to see, Doug, from here to Cluckwan, the rail would parallel the road, but I don't think it would wind up in the road right away. I think it would have to be a separate right of way. And then at Cluckwan, it would turn and follow the Chilkat River. This is all what's here. Many surveys, and of course the rail link study is the most popular one that followed many of the old ones. And then follow the Chilkat as far as the Kelsaw, the Kelsaw Valley, Kelsaw Lake, and then make the turn to go towards Haines Junction, which brings us to something that I want to get across to George. You have the Well Green mine that's being built at Burwash. Well, they're of course going to haul, and they're going to haul heavy loads. I don't know if the Canadian part of the Alcan is up to handling that, or the portion between Haines Junction and Haines. This is where I hope that rail will come in, and what I'm looking for at Haines Junction would be the equivalent of what Whitehorse used to have in the so-called Utah yard, and that's a transfer facility, where you have a great big straddle buggy is what they call them, that your truck drives in with containers on it, picks them up, sets them on a black car, and the truck goes back. That would save Well Green 150 miles of hauling coming down to Haines. It would save building that extra amount to our highway, requiring that extra asphalt and making a bit of a toll road out of it. So having something like that at Haines Junction would mean jobs in Haines Junction. Agreed, just the trucks making the run would make some jobs in Haines Junction. I don't know how many, it wouldn't be much, it'd just be enough for fuel if they needed it, or somebody to stay overnight, depending on how their schedule got messed up for making the round trip. So this is one reason I'm glad that you're here, is to try and get that across. That part of what we're looking at is the jobs along the way. And I believe it was a teleconference that Larry and Darcy were in a while back, came up with that rail costs 13 cents for every dollar you spend on trucking. So the mines ought to be very interested in the difference. I know if it was my mine, it would definitely be interested. So this is one of the reasons I've come to this issue, to get somebody from your community down here to become part of what we're working on here, because we all got to start singing the same song where we're going to be heard.
Don't worry about the same song sheet with you. Yeah, I don't mind telling you, I'd rather see a rail and big, heavy, overloaded trucks going down the Haines Road.
Well, everybody here that knows me will agree that I am a local cheapskate.
Okay.
And I got a theory. Taxpayers pay for roads. Users pay for rails. Let's build a railroad.
Agreed.
Even if we have to let Darwin bring the bike ride.
Well, in our case, expenses on the Klondike, taxpayers pay for the roads instead of users.
Yeah, right, I know, I understand the toll part of it, the heavy haul part. I'm with you on it, Andy, it's just that, finding the reason to keep it to just a regular road and then the rail is where I would like to see it wind up. I fully agree that if we can't get things moving toward the rail, that it's going to have to be done just as you described. And of course, with the Constantine mine that Darwin's part of, that's not going to have any rail. But I will say, we found in one of the old studies back in the early 1900s, they were looking at a monorail to go to Porcupine. So we're not inventing anything new here. We're just working on old stuff and bringing it back to life. Sure.
So one of the advantages that Haines has is you already have a road. You can get, your port is connected to the national highway system by road. Work with what you got, at least in the meantime. And if you can get a railroad in, that only enhances what you have. It doesn't detract from it. I mean, the beauty is You're connected. You're
Yeah, we have a place to start right today.
Absolutely.
You know, that's like when we were out looking at the Chuku property earlier today. There is the foundation of a previous ore terminal. Agreed, it's small, but it's a place to start. It's more than Darwin needs, 75 by 150. The concrete's all there, just needs a steel building on it. Put your hand out the door and say, hey, we got something else to do. So, Darwin, why don't you give the people a little idea what you're into and
Sure.
involved in here?
Well, our project is, just off the highway. When you come through across the border station on the highway, if you look to your right, the mountain right there is there we're working. It's a project that's been explored for the last 40 years, incrementally advancing every few years with the exploration that goes on. But it's still an exploration stage project. We've got a mineral resource. It's a fairly high-grade resource, but relatively small. It's about 5 million tons right now, 2% copper, about 5% zinc, some precious metal credits. We've always felt, probably 50 to 100% larger, and we'll be in business. But that's going to require a fair bit of exploration, drilling. Recently, just in the past year, we announced a deal with a Japanese smelting company, Dowa Metals and Mining. So they're going to be partners with us on the project. They have spent about 22 million over the next 4 years. That's into exploration, and it's our feeling that that's the kind of sum that's needed to get it past that hurdle to really know what the answer here is. So we're probably 2 years out before we have a decent idea if we're heading in the right direction. Probably 4 years to be pretty confident that it's looking right. And then you're going to have to backfill with all the feasibility details and engineering details. But it has a very real chance of going. It does, one of the big assets is its location. It's sitting right next to logging roads and highways and deep sea port. It's actually, talking about rail in general, infrastructure in general, I think one of the benefits that I think is lost on a lot of people, but not on people in my industry, is having that infrastructure that really dictates where the exploration dollars go. Mines aren't really that easy to find, or deposits aren't that easy to find. Mines are, harder still to be made. And that money goes, generally, the market really good, people will go further and further afield when oil prices are high, but the closer you are to infrastructure, power and transportation are your two biggies, the better your chances are. The more dollars that they go into invest in exploring an area, and the more deposits are going to be found. So that's the kind of thing that may come out of, a northern railroad, something like this. One of the benefits that you might not see right away, 20, 30 years on, you'll get a lot more dollars spent and perhaps more stuff done. As far as directly specific to us, talk about rail versus highway, there's a cost every time you move something or transport something. So you change from rail to, truck to rail, there's a cost there. We're so close here, and the volume of material we're dealing with, we're immaterial in the conversation. Really, we are. We're a high-grade selective type of operation, is what we would be. The port is what's really important to us. And, when everything's paced in time according to, in our view, where we're at with the project. We don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves with the infrastructure. It's great to see, the support and the options that are out there in the state and the community.
Kirk, I'd like to bring you into it. After all, you're councilman from Whitehorse. Whitehorse had rail service at one point from our good friends at WP and YR. You do know what that stands for, don't you?
White Castle, Yukon.
No, that's We Pushing You Ride. That's what you get for working for them.
Yeah, well, I did work for them.
Maybe you got some...
Brushing the docks in Whitehorse.
So maybe you've got some viewpoints on what rail coming close to Whitehorse again might benefit or harm, or what your views might be.
I'm with everybody here. It's all about benefit. And the other thing that I'm taken by is that discussion I took part in a couple of weeks ago. It was hosted in Skagway. Missed it because of the avalanche on the Skagway Road. But I was on the conference line, and I was taken by a comment made by someone in attendance who said that
In excess of 50% of all the small craft harbor dock space is being taken up by Yukon. Now, there's a really interesting insight into the degree to which there's an awful lot of interaction between what's happening in the interior of the Yukon and the state of Alaska. And what that says, and it goes back to this discussion about roads versus rail, or roads and rail, is that the roads are doing something else as well. The roads aren't just all about getting product to market or supplies in. They're also about people transport, getting people back and forth between our two countries. And I think we should continue to build on that and build it in a safe and an inviting way, so that we can continue to have that relationship back and forth at the people level.
Right.
Now, having said that, the reality is Yukon has been in the last number of years taking off where it comes to the mineral industry and certainly exploration. We're also on the eve of about three fairly significant mines in the territory, and others in the medium and long term that could take off in a very big way. That's going to mean that we'll be taxing that infrastructure in a very significant way, not just the Port of Skagway, which is sort of the low-hanging fruit for a lot of that activity that comes out of Whitehorse and down, but certainly here as well through Haines. When you talk about Belgreen, Casino was looking at the option of possibly coming down through here, and kind of a long shot, but some of the properties, Crest Iron Ore deposit in the North Yukon. There's also now a new talk about LNG as an energy supply for the Yukon Territory. That's going to need road, rail, something to get LNG product into the territory to increase and expand the energy activities in the territory.
At our summit in September, Richard Wyman was here from Northern Cross.
Right.
And they're doing the exploration up on the Eagle Plains for both oil and gas. And just on what they had figured at that point, they figured that in the long run, they would probably want to run a gas pipeline down here to Haines. He looked at our tank farm area as being a possible place for the LNG. Chatted with him email-wise just a couple of weeks ago. He figures any of that's at least 10 years away, but at least you would then have your own LNG. And where they differ from what's being done in Alaska, they're looking at develop the gas, a few miles of pipe, and have some customers, a few more and have some more customers. When you get done taking care of your own customers, then export it. Then, they're kind of a pay-as-you-go sort of thought, which I think bears some real thought. But yes, LNG, there's no question that where the world's going. LNG is going to be the clean power in the not too distant future. There's a lot of trucks, as Matt was talking about. There's some of the Canadian national trains are now running on it. It's all his fault.
There you go. Well, Bill, I have to say it really is about the investment in infrastructure, because you've got those critical linear corridors that gets both people and product in and out. And with the Yukon's expansion going on now, I don't see that stopping anytime soon. We've got this little hiccup around access to capital in the mining industries. That's flattened things significantly in the territory. I don't see that lasting all that long, and especially those mines that have already proven out, those we'll see going into production, being the eternal optimist that I am. But once you've got one linear corridor, as mentioned earlier, with the road, you've got access to the potential to put in other corridors. Once those are in place, you've then got properties that might not have been economic without the corridor become economic when there's that
what you're saying about the economics things are very simple. The thing is, as long as they keep producing people, which I don't think there's anybody going to stop, that means that we're going to need goods, and those goods start with the minerals out of the ground. So we're going to need more and more of those minerals, and it's a matter of where people find them and where they're willing to work together to produce them. Now, if anybody comes around to the idea how to stop this thing of creating people, well, then we all better look at this a different way.
And another asset that this whole region has is its political stability. And that's why the Chinese are buying in so heavily into some of these mega mining operations. And they might be able to, get minerals for a better price in some third world country that's unstable, but they realize that this whole part of the earth, Canada, U.S. Canada, is politically stable. And there's certain things they can pretty solidly count on, and, in the next 100 years, which is the way they think. And that's the way I've started thinking as well. Like, I don't get too excited about any particular thing we're talking about, because I'm pretty darn sure within the next 100 years it's going to happen. Maybe in the next 5 years, 10, 15, 20, I'm not really worried about the exact time. But this is the way the Chinese think as well. And 100-year cycles is a minimum, but then even longer. And it's helped me a lot in my thinking, so I don't get too excited or stressed out over any particular thing. Because it's just a timeline thing that we can't, we can only imagine and guess at now.
Can I add to that? Because you hit on a very important point, which again underscores the need to build the infrastructure and get that working over the medium and long term. And that is that in the Yukon, there are a number of properties that are quite massive. And then there are the other properties that are more on a smallish dimension that really need, smaller mining companies with some capital, but not the big guys. And the big dollars, like the ones coming out of China and Asia, they're looking for the really big plays, the really big developed or not undeveloped areas in North America that they can buy into and they can control a massive deposit. They're not looking at these smaller ones. So what those smaller properties are looking for are the ways to build the economics so that they can argue to the financing world for the smaller pools of money that will get them into production. That's a harder piece of business to deal with. But if they've got the energy and they've got the road access, they're an awful lot closer to building that economic argument that says, here's $100 million that is needed on the smaller property as opposed to the $3, $4, $5 billion that would be needed for a casino or a well-green or what have you. So there are a whole host of really important integrated strategic considerations that all circle back around to this question of infrastructure. Very briefly.
I think we've got to pencil those in, because we know they're there's tens of thousands of mineral prospects in this part of Alaska and the Yukon, tens of thousands. And if as the infrastructure gets built, maybe for the mega projects, that's going to make it totally feasible for the smaller projects to come online. And somebody better be penciling those numbers in as well in the future projections.
Yeah. So, well, Kurt, just giving additional credence to what you said. That's one thing about the big pipeline companies. They take the big producers' stuff whole hog, and it's the smaller producers that don't have a way to get their product out, whereas rail, we can do all of that as well. So, if you have your big pipeline heading down to the States and that the Keystone gets approved, still it's all the small producers need to get their product out, and we can do that for them. So, just to add.
And I was going to sort of in the same area, is that we often talk about what will happen to our communities when we build the infrastructure, what will happen in terms of jobs, economic impact. We need to also look at what happens to our communities if we don't build the infrastructure. What happens in 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years if we don't develop the port in Skagway, in Haines, if we don't build a pipeline, if we don't build a railroad? What happens if we don't do this? What does that mean for the sustainability of our communities in the long term? We always look at what's going to happen if and when we build.
We're getting some of those effects right now, Mike. Our school population's down. When they worked on the budget this year, they looked at the fact that it looks like over the next 2 years, they'll be down another 50 students. It's happening. We have a secret weapon.
Excuse me, Bill.
Okay, well, thanks.
Excuse me, I have to go to a Board of Equalization. dedication meeting.
Another fun meeting.
Thank you for coming. See you
We have a
later.
secret weapon here, and that's Sally Smith that's sitting back there, who works for Senator Begich.
I've been found.
And Senator Begich introduced a bill in Congress for the northern ports, or Arctic ports, how it was worded, but she's assured me it includes us. And it's just great to have the
concept
congressional...
does.
Huh?
The concept does. That doesn't mean there's any earmark. I need to
Okay.
make that clear.
Yeah, well, but the point is that our delegation is interested in what we're doing and actually working toward helping Alaska with its ports. You know, and again, I still don't have my hand out, don't intend to put my hand out, but what they can do from their end of it with regulations and permits and so forth. It's nice to know that help is there. Does that pretty well cover it?
Eloquently said, sir.
Not what her job.
Did the Senator's bill include, there was some language in there or somewhere about looking at the Corps being able to work with P3 finance models to develop Arctic ports and stuff? Was that the Senator's bill?
I
or
can't
something?
cite chapter and verse, but I can find out for you. I think the big thing, both Senator Murkowski and Senator Begich, it got the language inserted for port development. And they spoke specifically to the Arctic, but I am assured that they're talking all Alaska ports. That just right now is the big enchilada in the picture.
Senator Murkowski specifically mentioned Haines as part of it.
It's all combined into one, but when you look at the press releases, that's where the focus is, because that's where the pressure is right now.
So in other words, on what we've all collectively been doing is moving things forward. We got help. Dave worked diligently to put together a PowerPoint presentation. A lot of it was on this list of questions that's on the table. That is where we started with the idea of running this meeting, but as usual, it was much more interesting things than what's on that sheet. But he did put together a lot of pictures of the area, some of what goes on. So I'll turn it over to Dave.
Okay, what I'd like to focus on is the Port of Haines. It's a very realistic industrial port in terms of it can operate 365 days a year, which is absolute certainty. And that harbor, the harbor is incredibly protected. And starting from the entrance from the Gulf of Alaska on into these sheltered shipping lanes and up to the Port of Haines, you couldn't ask for a better, more secure way to get international shipping to the port and then back out. Cruise ships in the past, in the scope of Alaska, we have used Haines as their main port of refuge when they have to run from, say, a giant fall storm. They just simply come from the Gulf and jump into icy straits and come up to Haines and hang out until it's safe to get back on the way again. And it's not just cruise ships that do that. For instance, here's just Haines looking north. The Skagway's up there, and then you see the east-west orientation of Blue Tap Inlet and these big mountains, and also Portage Cove here in front of Haines. It's this east-west orientation that allows ships like this cruise ship right here, the Staten Dam, who last week couldn't get into Skagway because of the wind, and they're taking refuge right there, much to the glee of our local tourism people, because we got that shipload of people as customers last week, and it's a surprise. Also, I think this the Atlantic Tramp. They couldn't get into Skagway. This was earlier this year. They had to anchor out, and this is just off the industrial docks in the Tap Inlet. And they not only had to anchor out there to avoid the storm, but then they stayed all day because Skagway's ore dock had a cruise ship tied up to it. And it couldn't get in even during this wonderful blue sky day the next day. So there it sat and then finally was able to get into Skagway.
And the one in the corner.
And then here's another ore ship that had to hide in Portage Cove and run to town. There's quite the storm going on out there, and for 3 days it just sat there in the relatively calm Portage Cove, safely at anchor while it waited. So the also as far as the Lutek Inlet itself, these slides here, right in the inlet. Now this one here, this is actually looking east back out to the Lynn Canal. There happens to be a ferry coming in, also a tug barge at this end. Here's the sport facilities are in this bight here, which is a really handy thing because it puts them out of the way even for users of Lutek Inlet itself. It puts and then Walt Disney couldn't have designed it any better as far as the kind of ideal layout. It's just perfect out of the way. It allows, say, if you had to do a floating facility to get something happening quick on a real short timeline, a floating, like for an LNG facility of some sort, there's room to like moor a floating dock there temporarily. So there's a lot of assets about this Lutek Inlet that very few people are actually aware of. The further on into the inlet here, looking west, there are residential areas way back in there, and they are so far away from the industrial port, and the port here is inside this bight that the residential people can't even see the port activity. So, which is kind of nice. In other words, there's not going to be residential.
Going to stick out like a sore thumb.
There's not going to be, residences against the port because it's going to be in their face.
What's the maximum size of vessel that the Lutek can accommodate?
Well, you got several things. You've got the Chilkoot Lumber Company property, which Larry's head of. What's the biggest ship you had when you were?
The biggest we had in there was 44,000 tons, and I don't know that there was anything any bigger, when either Chittick or Snell was operating. We had both freighters and chip ships in the 44,000 ton class.
See, they have good deep water. Was it 45 to 60 foot low?
On the east end of the dock is about 35, and it goes up to in excess of 60 on the west end of the dock.
And it's similar at the tank farm dock, the Lutek dock. Darcy or Mark, have you got, was it 26 or 28 feet, something like that you got?
There's some, yeah, it varies, but, to average about 30.
Right. So that's why the Lutek dock is ideally suited for what it's doing right now, bringing things in. And of course, with mining, there's almost more tonnage of equipment that goes in to build a mine than the tonnage of ore that comes out. Bruce Carr, I don't know what the numbers were, but it was astounding. So the borough's Lutek dock is ideal for that. And there's a barge ramp there. What's that, a 100-ton ramp?
Oh, jeez, I forgot. We just did a assessment of that ramp. That's about right. Ballpark.
So, some pretty big stuff to be brought in. At the moment, with the containers, they just have a big forklift that they can take the containers off. So, there's a lot of things, and then, like I say, to get back to where the tank farm is, that dock, that's deep water. They put pretty good sized tankers. I can remember seeing some years ago that were pretty good size. So, there's no real water problem when you look at the whole port. What a lot of people don't realize, and this is something Bill was looking at this morning, is when you add up the whole port, from the end of the Chilkoot property to this end of the tank farm, you're about that close to the size of the Port of Anchorage.
Yeah, here's the overview right here. And on our website, we compared this to the other major ports, Valdez, Nikiski, Anchorage, and they're all approximately the same size. In our case, the available development area is pretty much equal to the Port of Anchorage. You can see that all this, that's all usable waterfront, and it's all docks now. And it could be even further. The borough, they can expand their dock phase. There's a lot more potential here and all along there, and as well as here.
The question here at the tank farm property would be whether you're going to stick with liquids and use that type of dock, or whether you're going to switch to freight and go to a freight type of dock or an ore dock.
Does the right-of-way still exist with the old pipeline up to Fairbanks, or is that?
No. There's some of the pipeline left here on this side that Larry's part of IPAC, and they use it for conduit for power cables. And
Conduit from about 5 miles to the border that carries all the transmission.
But the way that treaty was set up, as far as I know, with Canada, was the day they stopped using it, the property went back to Canada.
Now, here's a Chilkoot lumber dock under full use and development. They're using their 27 acres, but then they have an Alaska Tidelands lease that they're in use, and the Schaefer property adjacent. So they had Point, the waterfront, Operation Point, and then they had Uplands. That was a chip. There were chips there. They had housing up here. So they have a lot of. That's just a good example, just looking at that full development, what in the future would be possible.
Yes,
That
that
little building this
entire,
way.
the entire waterfront there is all long-term tideline leases.
So from a property point of view, it's squared away.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is real important because, well, this whole area is zoned, marine industrial, so there's no, arm wrestling match with the local government over the zoning, which is a tremendous
In
plus.
the new comprehensive plan of the borough for the port to be developed and the idea that there will be rail transportation. So we don't have to reinvent our local government rules at all.
And then this map here shows the actual ownership of the various properties. And actually, in my mind, like we all know about the Tidelands lease, the Chilkoot lumber, here's a private parcel that's up for sale right now and available, the Haines frontage, another private parcel that's for sale right now, and then this 200-acre U.S. government former tank farm, and the tanks are all in there. And here's the sleeper that excites me, is the state mental health land right here, and that's all on a big bench. There's a continuation of the slopes here. And that is owned by state mental health for income protection purposes, for sale to make income, or to lease for income protection purposes. So this is, in my mind, the ace in the hole, because that allows then a port with uplands as well as a very local waterfront. That's the key right
Have you ever tried to get state mental health for it?
there. All they want is to make money off of it. That's all they want.
Not quite.
By the time you're through, you'll have a mental condition.
Yeah.
And that's legally why they don't.
No, I know. When I was in the council in Scottsboro, we struggled with them for years to
Yeah,
come.
it's for income production, and if they have a nice income production opportunity, well, they're legally obligated to.
Mark?
I just wanted to add on the dog face depth, and there is something that doesn't, you don't have to go out very far before you get into the 45 to 60 foot depths. It's like 50 to 100 feet out. So we don't want to have the idea that there are limitations with the depth of any vessel.
That's true of any dock you could alter to make it
Well,
convenient.
my point here is that you don't have to go out very far, and you have a pretty gentle slope. So on any of these facilities, so if the dock face depth is an issue, just extending out, you're going to get into some good deep cover.
There's also already a freshwater source and a hydro project from the major drainage that comes down here. And this hydro project actually provides power to the state territory. And so there's a freshwater source and.
What is that? About a half a megawatt?
I don't know.
Yeah, it runs, I think, about 300 max on it, kW.
But runs a ferry terminal and some of the stuff there, dock.
Is it scalable?
The hydro?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's part of AT&T's grid. It's running right in the grid now.
Do you have more there?
Those are the points I wanted to make, except for Haines has got with due to the state oil revenue, we've got fantastic community facilities. And I know some of the corporate people that have been here have really noticed that. If they have to station people here, station families, you know, to live in Haines there, they've been delighted with what we have for facilities. And quite a lot of culture in this community as well. It's the #1 community in the United States per capita for artists. And I would suspect for musicians, actually, performing musicians.
The library gets awards every year for the
Yeah.
way they do things.
And so the oil revenue is allowed, and our school here is new. Most of that school facility is new. And we have a lot of local pride. These are all the state championship banners our high school basketball team has won in recent times. You know, we do pretty well. Where we just had a track meet, a regional track meet, and we came in second, I think, in the regional track meet for small schools.
It's good you guys had track this year, we didn't have it.
Well, we got rained out here. We you know, it snowed out, but they were able to do the regional just last week. So it was the first
But
track
if
meet.
you're nice to Santa Claus this year, he might let you have it next.
You know, I know the jolly old dog.
Well, he's
But
right
I
in
met
town.
him, you know, so, yeah.
We had a list of thought questions, but we haven't really covered these in detail today, but we've covered them in a general way. Bill, do you want to just quick?
I don't know that we really need to, because we've hit the
Yeah, I
edge
don't see how we have
all the way
time.
down the line.
Everybody got these in their survey, and these are, yeah, I'm going to have to flesh these out at the first time, we all know that. And we probably won't be able to get the answers today, so.
But I do hope as a result of this that we'll have more interaction between Haines Junction and Whitehorse as far as what we're trying to do and what you people might need. In fact, I think there's at least one or maybe 2 copies of the list of questions down there that maybe you want to take. Has Kurt got one? Kind of take it back and think about it, and it might help with helping with the general push of what we're all working on here.
And Bill, if I may just make a quick comment. I want to say that I'm here because the mayor and council also see the value of spending an awful lot of time working with the state and with the communities here to make the relationship stronger than it already is, and to find ways in which the synergies between the state and the territory can work to mutual advantage for both of us. So we've got quite a strong potential there in the territory. And somebody mentioned the political stability. Absolutely right. It's a really good overall structure that's in place politically and regulatory. And we think that it's just going to continue to grow, and it will have to rely on its relationship with the state of Alaska to be able to capitalize on those economic values.
In the spirit of that working together, we worked awful hard to get Mark Toas from Economic Development involved in the Alaska State Rail Plan for the Technical Advisory Group, TAG. And that's a door open right into the state with the rail. So if you contact Mark a little bit, you know, he'll be able to be a help. He's executive assistant to Curry Dixon. I'm sure Haines knows him really well. But it took some pushing to convince Murray Walsh that runs that to get the other side of the border, because if anything happens with rail in this part of the world, it's going through the Yukon. You know, a rep agreed in 1889, I believe it was, a group formed the Haines Mission Boundary Railroad. The idea was to run from downtown to the border. But that's the only railroad that's ever going to be in Haines without going into the Yukon. You know?
Well, they were hooking up with another company that was going to build the Yukon portion. And that was actually a hookup. They started a U.S. company to get to the border, and then a Canadian corporation was going to build the rest of it.
Actually, Whiteness actually started here.
Yeah, it was both Haines
Before it went to Skagway, and there had been a map on the second floor of the Golden North that I saw years ago that showed them going to come from Haines and go up. But at that time, material was expensive and labor was cheap. So it'd be much shorter to go from Skagway. So what if it took a few extra employees and maybe a few of them fell off the edge on the way up, but the rail got done, is what made it go over there. Of course, today it's the reverse. Labor is expensive and the rail's not too bad. Along those lines, everybody's been talking about this whole rail concept. I realized that one key element got left out. You ought to get a hold of a rail construction company and find out what it costs to build one. So I got a hold of several, and Atlas Rail Construction Company out of Pennsylvania, which is one of the biggest in the United States, we've been very responsive. And we got down to, well, what does it cost? And they work on the principle of $165 to $185 a foot. I figured, well, Alaska, so $200 a foot, which comes out to $1.4 million a mile. Way back when I first got into this, Bill Sheffield said, oh, it's $1 billion a mile. So Bill wasn't too far off. And he, of course, he's vice chair of the Alaska Railroad. So we're friends are pretty along the ball.
If I could just add to Bill, Yukon government and the city of Whitehorse are, of course, different governments.
Right.
But at the same time, because in excess of 80% of the kind of economic activity in the territory is either resident in the city of Whitehorse or connects into the city of Whitehorse, we have our own very strong interest in staying on top of this this relationship question. So by all means, I'll keep us dialed into all.
Now, are you staying overnight?
I'm staying overnight, yes.
I don't know how late you can stay tomorrow or how interesting it might be, but the Alaska Rail Study Plan meeting will be here at Haines tomorrow afternoon.
And
Bruce
unfortunately, I have to be back to Whitehorse for a council session in the evening, so unfortunately.
Well, I'll tell you what, we've got each other's email, and I'll hook you up with Murray Walsh, and of course Murray works kind of under and with Andy there. So
No,
maybe,
actually, Murray works for our commissioner.
yeah,
Doesn't work under
technically,
me.
okay. All right. Can we see to it that Murray has the idea that the city of Whitehorse ought to be included in the plan? Can we get that message to him?
Definitely.
See, it does pay to have them all in the same room.
I have a B&B in Haines, I get an increasing amount of traffic from the Yukon because of the population and new people, and they all hear about Haines. And in talking with them, I find that they are 10 times better educated than we are in terms of what's happening as far as resource development, mining, the exploration going on. I think the Radio Star and the Yukon News, you have some really good writers, resource and economic development journalists who actually write regularly. So the Whitehorse public is much better educated by far, say, than the public here in Haines. And so I see you, Haines Junction, Whitehorse folks, as tremendous human resources just for us because you're on top of it, you have good information, and people are really internalizing it and working with it all the time. And we've got a lot to learn from. In fact, I would like to hook into some of the resource journalists, resource writers, and get some kind of a thing where they do a little corner in the Haines newspaper, just some kind of cross-fertilization thing.
We're kind of running out of time. I'm afraid the manager might tell us that we're running over with the Chilkat Center. At 7 o'clock, there's going to be a meet and greet and reception for a guy that's running for governor, and that'll be over at the Captain's Choice in the lounge. And I realize we have some state employees here who can't get involved in such things, but there's a real nice bar in the lounge, and we're going to be over at the other end, so, hello everybody if they want to be there. Other than that, I think Bill Walker will agree that if you're interested in the seafood, he found the best salmon that he'd ever had in his life at the Chilkat Bakery, which is only a couple blocks away from the Captain's Choice. So I'm not telling anybody what to do, but maybe some of you are hungry. We've got an hour before the reception.
between Dave and I and one or two others, we gotta put this room back in. I want to thank everybody for coming, and please, all of you, stay in communication